Hello, everyone. GM. Welcome back to another episode of Overpriced JPEGs. I am joined here today by Austin Hurwitz, SVP of Web3 and Community at Venice Music. We're going to talk all about specifically what's going on at Venice, what Venice is, why it's really driving the space. And by the space, I mean like the music space forward, both in Web3, but I would argue broadly speaking as well. There are a lot of macro changes underway in the music industry. So Austin and I will get into that, talking about monetizing superfans, why that's super relevant in the world of music, collectibles, music collectibles, and a whole bunch else. So excited to get into this convo. And Austin, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here.
So I want you to give the quick backstory on Venice because it's interesting how it emerged. But before you do that, we do need to hear from our lovely, lovely sponsors. MetaMask is the leading Web3 wallet to get you access to everything you need in Web3. If you're just getting started on your NFT journey, you need MetaMask. And if you need to fund your MetaMask account in order to buy that NFT that you've been eyeing, well, now you can do that directly through MetaMask. Just click the blue buy button on the home screen. Personally, I'm mad that I've spent extra gas fees transferring money from Coinbase to MetaMask in order to buy NFTs. I've been using MetaMask directly, and it is so much better. You can also buy stable coins and native tokens from Ethereum, Polygon, Avalanche, CC0, and others, and you can do it directly with your debit card, your credit card, through Apple Pay or Google Pay. And there is now an improved buying experience on MetaMask Mobile. You'll only see tokens that are in your region, so it's personalized to you, and you'll get real-time quotes, so you know you're always getting the best deal. If you haven't downloaded MetaMask yet, what are you waiting for? Go try it out. You can learn more about buying cryptocurrencies with MetaMask at metamask.io/buy-crypto.
Immutable X is the layer 2 platform for crypto gaming. Immutable offers massive scalability with up to 9,000 transactions per second and instant transaction confirmation. No more gas fees, no more waiting around for your transaction to clear. Immutable's zero knowledge rollup finally unlocks the world of crypto gaming. Immutable X is the only gas-free NFT minting platform with over 26 million NFTs minted, all with zero gas fees. With the power of Immutable, gaming developers don't also need to become smart contract developers. They just need to plug in to Immutable's API and instantly start unlocking the full potential of crypto assets inside of games. This is why world-class companies and projects have decided to deploy on Immutable X, like GameStop, Ember Sword, Planet Quest, Illuvium, TikTok, and many more behind the scenes. So start building your game on Immutable X today at immutable.com.
Okay, Austin, hit us with it. Tell the folks really how Venice emerged and why it was created.
Yeah, so Venice was founded in 2018, late 2018, by Troy Carter and Susie Rue. People may have heard of Troy in the past. He was a manager for Lady Gaga. John Legend, Charlie Puth has been an industry magnate for over 20 years, and
like really launched Lady Gaga, right? Like he was like the force that created the Lady Gaga like machine.
Correct. Like that's kind of been his thing throughout everyone that he's managed. Like he starts at the very beginning. He's not someone that's ever taken on a superstar. Like he really loves the grind of the underdog. And it's something that just relates to his story growing up impoverished in Philadelphia. He actually got signed to a record deal by like Will Smith and Jazzy Jeff like early on. And so he just like really identifies with that. But yeah, so
I didn't realize he'd done it for all the artists. I thought it was just Lady Gaga, but it was also John Legend. Damn, so, that is such a crazy track record.
John Legend was an introduction from Kanye, and it was like, I think his name is John Stevens or something of that nature. Literally, Kanye gave him the name Legend, talked to Troy, and then Troy was the one that like started to manage him from there. So like ground floor at every step. And so, yeah, he had been a manager. He started this company, Atom Factory, and was working in partnership with Susie Rue, who is our other co-founder there. And that was like a boutique management firm. They also did a bunch of investments. They were early seed investors in Spotify, Uber, WeTransfer, a bunch of different technology companies. It was through that experience that Troy got in touch with Daniel Ek at Spotify when they were trying to come to the US, and they would do Troy would do a lot of advising for him. And then as they were getting ready to go public, Troy really leaned in and actually went into the company to be the global head of creator services. help them establish relationships with artists globally, and help them be in a position to go public. And during that experience, he had worked with these mega superstars within these major label systems. And so he understood like what that looked like, but not necessarily what it's like to go the independent route. Like, even though that these artists were small at one point, they were all in the major label system. So he very quickly identified the discrepancies in terms of like resources and teams and support between independent artists and major label artists. And when he left Spotify after they went public, he was really drawn to this idea of empowering independence and what would it look like for an artist and their team to be able to choose not to go the major label route, to be able to actually have all of those same resources, but maintain, full independence and maintain rights to their ownership and their masters and have that full team around them. So they started the company with that idea, end of 2018, built distribution software to get music out globally to all of the streaming services, built payment rails, and analytics and reporting and a full services suite. And so, I came in about 6 months into that journey, middle of 2019, served as our VP of music operations to really stand everything up. It's like a very amorphous title of just like, we're a startup and we need a lot of things done. So wear a bunch of hats. And I had come from 5 years at Amazon Music. I had a licensing background, so I negotiated all the contracts with the record labels there and then the streaming services here. And from there, I moved over to product and helped us build that out and got us to our MVP 0 to 1 to actually build that distribution software. And then we can kind of talk about like what the next step was and how we got there. But
cool.
I can pause
I want to
there.
ask you, I know you were pretty integral in, as you just said, the distribution software piece, which I want to explain to folks, because we think about music distribution and it's like, well, Spotify upended that. Like, what do you mean that's distribution? But you're really talking about the step before that, like distributing the music from I just made a record in my garage or whatever to getting it on Spotify and getting it onto other platforms that must exist. And you can tell that I don't know the deep music world that well, and I'm very mainstream and just listen to Spotify. But that's what you mean by distribution product. Is that right? Can you touch on those products a little bit more?
Yeah, and to that point, I think most people would be surprised that you can't actually go, nor quite frankly would you want to go direct to distribute to all of these streaming services. So whether it's Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Tencent, YouTube is the one exception on the video side, but you actually need a partner who has built the technical infrastructure. It's in this program called DDEX, or this metadata standard called DDEX that you distribute out to. And so you actually need to build a separate, what we call pipe for each of these streaming services. And then what we're building is for artists and their teams to actually be able to go on to an interface, upload their music, fill in the metadata, and distribute it out. And we will make the changes on the back end so that it fits every unique format for all these different streaming services, because they all, while they use the same standard, they take different fields or on different versions. And so we're constantly in the back end making sure that it goes out seamlessly to, at this point, over 55 different streaming services globally.
Wow. You also mentioned payment rails as part of this. Like, what is that software? Like, what is the need on that side of things?
Yeah, so it's twofold. One, we have to be able to receive all of the royalties on behalf of the artist, all of the reporting, be able to ingest that, and then overlay it into analytics. So that is a process of setting up banking information with all these different streaming services who all have different requirements in terms of, what they're paying out in terms of different currencies and the type of banks that they're able to accept. We then need to convert what that looks like. So they pay typically in like one or two currencies, but it's happening. We pay out in USD. And so like we need to then be able to spot convert that everything to USD.
Wow. What's the other currency other than USD that streaming platforms pay out in?
Yeah, so we get payments in pounds. Like Spotify will do USD, pounds, yen, and euro. I believe are the four that we see. But everything that we pay out is in USD, and so we ingest all of those reports. The reports are holistic across everyone that we distribute. We break it up by the individual artist and repertoire that is being represented by all these different accounts. We then pay those out to all the individual rights holders. So if there are 5 people on a track, they all get their pro rata share. And so we set up individual accounts with them. We use Stripe. They're a fantastic partner to be able to input bank information and make sure that we're sending out payments on a monthly basis.
Dude, somebody get a smart contract in there. Like,
I'm
like half hearing what you're saying and half just being like, this is broken. Like, this is wildly labor intensive. And of course, indie artists couldn't manage all of this. Like, what the heck? Like, that's
the month end close process. I mean, it's rough. Like when I was initially starting, we're building this software in real time. And so people would be surprised to know that oftentimes, like, a lot of companies are doing this on spreadsheets, which is like very error prone, terrifying. You make one, mistake in your formula and you could end up not paying people the right amount. And so obviously we've built our own software. We don't have any of those concerns anymore, but that is a concern for a lot of people that are trying to manage their own back office. But still, the month end close process for us is like a 2-week thing. Like every month.
That's crazy. And it also, my understanding is it takes a long time for royalties. Like my streams are playing on Spotify. It's like 6 months as an artist before I'm even going to see the royalties from that anyway. Not that it matters because it sounds like it's such a pittance relative to like, the amount of streams you get that it almost doesn't matter.
Yeah. I mean, it depends. I think like at the top level, if you're a superstar, it's real money for sure.
But if you're a top level superstar, you have so much money, like relative to the wealth you're making from touring, then it almost becomes like,
And I actually, we'll get into this later with CC0 and everything, but I actually wrote an argument as to like why I think taking a step back on the recorded music side in terms of trying to maximize revenue there could be a net benefit for everyone. But in that sense, like the payment terms are really long and they vary by all the different streaming services. And so we're basically lining up every month what we have and sending it out, but it's not complete because like Spotify, for example, will send you reporting net 30 after the period. So you're already 30 days out after the plays happened. Then you have to send an invoice, which they then have to pay out net 30 from receipt of that. So you're looking at anywhere between like 60 and 90 days after the actual usage happened. And that's one of the better ones. Like there are other streaming services that you're talking about biannual payments. It literally just dropping you a check every 6 months. And so, it is it's a poorly constructed service with a lot of middlemen in terms of getting artists their money. Fortunately, there are some solutions that we are seeing develop, like Paperchain, which is using API data from Spotify to effectively approximate what the payout should be and giving artists debit cards so that they can pay that money out. It's effectively in advance. And they're actually collateralized by MakerDAO, which is super cool.
Oh, that's so cool. So I'm harping on this a little bit because I do think it's really critical for people to understand how the industry works right now. Like I feel like my job or for this podcast, it's both how do I illuminate the Web3 world for maybe people who are new to Web3, but also how do I illuminate these industries to people in Web3, right? So we can, think about how do we solve these problems. So like all of this, it just feels like it's so obvious that there are ways to improve the system and ways that smart contracts could probably play a huge role.
I think what a lot of people forget as well, or just don't think about, but music is literally the oldest form of media. Like it goes back the furthest in terms of audio. The laws and regulations around music are the oldest. I mean, we literally have conversations around mechanical royalties, which is effectively like a type of publishing that is paid out, but it was based on the mechanical process of creating a record. No one is mechanically creating any records anymore. So that kind of gives you like a sense of we're playing in very strange constructs. And it gives you also like a vision as to why Web3 can be so powerful here is there's just a lot of legacy infrastructure that makes the industry both like very slow, very opaque. There's just like way too many middlemen to actually be able to process any of this information. But
is it also why it might take longer for Web3 to fully permeate music
1,000%.
Because there are so many legacy systems in it?
Yeah. So I mentioned before, prior to Venice, I was at Amazon Music. And in 2017, that was like the first big wave of people like Jack Spallone and Dot Blockchain BC and Ujo Music, and they were really trying to tackle the licensing, like creating a decentralized licensing ledger on chain for the entire music industry. Was very clear to me. I had written a white paper on it at the time. It was certainly ambitious, but if you spend a little bit of time in the music industry, you recognize, or just look at the history of it, the power players that be always are resistant to change. And particularly like if they're not financially incentivized to make a change, why would they? Like the current system benefits them. And that's why it was never going, the first like foray into Web3 for music was doomed to fail. And I know Jack has like come back since and said, yeah, it was a bit naive to think that like we would change the majors. And that's why this wave is so much more powerful, is because it is happening at the grassroots level, at the independent level, people that fully control their rights and can actually and have the most to gain. So that's where I think we're gonna continue to see it permeate more and more. The majors are like starting to play balls, but in very, very confined sandboxes. I think really the independent space is the one that's latched on to Web3, and we'll see the sea change come from them.
I've heard Troy, your boss, and who we mentioned earlier, like talk about, I guess, all the headwinds that the legacy music industry is facing right now. And it sounds like he's quite optimistic that these master, by master percent, kind of these like record labels, these like big, record labels, majors, that's what we're saying, right? Majors, not masters.
Yeah.
These big record labels that they'll ultimately be forced to change because they're fighting up against too much competition right now. Can you speak a little bit to like what's forcing that change? Why, I assume you, but I know Troy is like optimistic about why this change is coming.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely echo Troy's sentiment there. I think a little bit of like history of how music has developed to where we are, where as a creator, you have significantly more control over your audience and where your music is than you had before. It really comes down to the fact that distribution has been commoditized and democratized to that sense to all artists. So if you think prior to the streaming era, or prior to the Napster era, like digital as a format, just put it to the side, you had to have a distributor. The only way that people heard your music, the only way it got on the radio, was to get in these like retail stores through someone that had a connection. You couldn't go to like FYE, and I'm like dating myself saying this, or like Circuit City. you couldn't just go there and be like, hey, I would love for my album to be on your shelf. It didn't work that way. Like you had to go through a distributor, and that's how it worked. And so these people held immense amount of power. Like they determined what music was played, who was hot. Like everything went through them. And then streaming happened. And all of a sudden you had a new business model emerge where distributors for like DIY artists, like a TuneCore or a DistroKid or a CD Baby, would democratize distribution. You could be everywhere. And so all of a sudden that distributor doesn't have any of the power anymore to say who can listen to what. And we've actually seen that play out in terms of the amount of music that people are listening to now. Like the diversity and the number of artists has consistently gone up. And so that's I know a lot of people like to poo-poo streaming, but like one of the major benefits has been that more music has been commercialized. People were making music before, it just wasn't being commercialized and couldn't make a career off of it. And so because of that, and then you see the sea changes of where discovery is happening. So it's not happening on the Spotify's and Apples and Amazons of the world. It's happening on TikTok. It's happening on YouTube. It's happening on IG. That is even more power to the creator in the sense of like, they can drive the narrative. They can build their own brand around that. And now music is becoming one part of the equation of what their entire brand and like what their revenue sources look like. And so when they're coming to the labels, like they have significantly more bargaining power simply because like there's so much more competition as well. And so that is naturally going to lead to better terms for artists. Now it's still not like great, particularly on the major label side. They're still owning masters. They're still signing like what I would define as fairly predatory deals where the artist is only taking like 15% That's after they recoup all of the costs that were spent on them. So I think we'll continue to see more opportunities for artists to own their audiences. I think that's one of the promises of Web3. We're not necessarily there yet, but like if you're a major, like you kind of have to change with the times because you no longer hold what was your key piece of leverage and distribution. You also no longer really hold your other key piece of like financing because now artists don't necessarily need it as much, or if they do, they have other opportunities to go and get it outside of the label.
So interesting. It strikes me too that like it should change because also the economic risk calculation for these labels needs to be changing because you can have artists who are proving themselves on other platforms. So before, where a label's coming in and they're taking a chance on all these artists, they don't know if they're going to succeed or not. Okay, they needed to be essentially compensated for that risk they were taking. But if you're an artist who has now 10 million followers on TikTok who like the stuff you put out, that is a significantly less risky bet for a label to be taking. So there's just, from logically speaking, the label should be willing to come down on the percentages that they think they need to be taking. And when you talk about additional financiers coming in, I think that's interesting too. And I think Web3 is playing a role in that. I know there's like private equity firms starting to play in this space a little bit, but you also have what's happening in NFTs and artists who are making money off of NFT drops. And I'll say it's still quite small and maybe you can speak to this, but it's making significantly more than they would make off of, hundreds of thousands of streams or plays on Spotify.
Yeah, it completely changes the equation. To your point, it is still fairly small, but those that have seen a lot of success, like the Daniel Allens and Latashas and Verites of the world, they have significantly more leverage as well because they don't need to come to the table with a label and say, hey, I need financing. What they're looking for is like a creative partner. They're still looking for access to opportunities. They're looking for people to come and collaborate with. Being an independent artist is still like a pretty lonely thing. And so that's, I think, where we as Venice have really tried to step in is, you maintain creative freedom, you maintain ownership of your masters, you have the financing already if you're on this Web3 front and you've been able to be successful in having these collectibles and these music NFTs. We're here to elevate it and open other doors as well. So it's still, the one caution to the wind, I would say, is it's still very small. And ultimately, what we try to preach is that there is a balance between Web 2 and Web 3. It's very challenging if you're commercially successful in Web 3, but you haven't built an audience on streaming platforms, on social platforms, to have anyone come to your show. It definitely has a place. It's going to continue to grow. But I'm always very cautious with the rhetoric that I see sometimes on social media around, we can just say, so long streaming, this model doesn't work for us. We're going full in Web3 and we're just doing music NFTs. I actually think that can be fairly dangerous just for where we're at today, particularly when you look at what NFT volume looks like right now. I mean, liquidity is basically dried up, and you're seeing that platforms are having to lower the amount of their mint prices right now in order to sell out. And so there's definitely a balance there. And it's about finding, what do each of these verticals do to accelerate you in your career and how they all play together.
I want to talk about how you see music NFTs or
Sure.
NFTs, call it in general, smart contracts, whatever, really playing in this space. And I'm really excited to get into the CCO conversation I know we are going to have. But just sticking on this macro picture question for a moment more, does the shift really come when, and will this happen in your opinion, when there's a psychological shift among artists in a really big way where they really understand that they hold more power or they hold more cards than maybe they think they do, and sort of as a group push back harder against these major labels? I'm sure there are more artists who have awareness around this because Taylor Swift has been very vocal about it and has a huge platform and has been saying, I shouldn't have signed the deals I did back then. Is that the key here?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think it's ultimately just it takes time to play out in the sense of, I was at Basel last year and we're sitting down with a fine artist who was describing how a lot of his contemporaries who are very commercially successful have not seen a need for NFTs because they've already made it. And so why would you justify putting in the effort? Why would you justify putting yourself up there to alienate yourself from your collectors and your fans? And I think that is analogous to music as well. Like, we shouldn't be looking to the majors, particularly for this sea change to occur. It's my opinion that in the long run, independence, and we've seen it, like if you look at the last few years of recorded music revenues, like the biggest year over year growth is in the independent music space. It continues to take away share from the majors. I still think like long term, it will make up a majority of music. It will take a long time to get there. But I think that's what we're going to see is the independents who are like have the most to gain financially, have the most to gain from building a really strong audience will be the ones to bring everyone else over. We're just waiting for the balance to change in terms of like who has the leverage right now.
Mm. You and I were talking before we started recording here about this recent change in the UK specifically. I won't get this phrase perfectly, but from my understanding, basically like the governing body of the UK charts recently ruled that NFT albums now counted towards the charts, right? So if you're an artist, Muse just dropped, I think, 1,000 NFTs that are associated with their album. And if you, so if they sold those 1,000 NFTs, that would be 1,000 extra album sales from a chart perspective. What do you think of this change, and anything else any insights you have as to what's happening here?
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting. Ultimately, like consumption is consumption, and that's what the charts are measuring is where are people listening to it and how do we quantify what a listen is? Because a lot of people will actually be surprised to know that not all listens are created equal. In fact, a listen from a streaming service is a significantly small like fraction compared to actually going and buying that album. It's valued significantly more if you buy it in terms of total consumption, and places like Billboard track this and the UK charts. And so I think ultimately, yeah, they should be included anywhere that people are listening. I'd be very interested to know what the full equation looks like, but it's a further validity of the space is growing. It's not going away. We should give, if anything, it like gives further justification for artists like Muse, who did the first like music NFT with Serenade that was going to be on the charts. Big act to be doing something like that. It gives them more reason to do it, because if there's one thing I've learned from being in the music industry, it is artists really care about their chart position, like very, very, very much. And so you've seen particularly in the US where artists like DJ Khaled have done like bundles where you like buy Mountain Dew and you get an album and things like that. Like people have always tried to like game the system in order to like be number one. I think that this will be a positive in that it is another outlet for people to use. And so it will give them more reason to invest in NFTs.
Do you think we are at the precipice of a wave where people like show off their music collections again in a way that they did when they had physical CDs, or people would collect even vinyls and like show it off in their bedroom, and now people will collect these digital albums so that they can show it off in the digital sphere and show their music fandom?
I think we're getting there. I think over time, I can see, I had met with one company who was building like literally like a vinyl crate. So the idea was that you bought the crate itself, and then that's effectively your mint pass for all of the NFTs in the season. And so one by one, you're actually like updating the metadata in the crate to add these vinyls. And if you're like crate digging, you can look at what people have. You can use them, create mixes. I think that's like really novel. And that, yeah, we'll go to a place where people are like showing off their music NFTs. I don't think we have great galleries for that now, nor do I think we have phenomenal virtual experiences where people are actually going to look at collections. And it's one thing to like, if you're at a party and you're going to look at someone's vinyl collection, you're like, oh, this is cool. You usually go and play it after. And so I think there's like some element of, we need both like a good viewing experience, but then a place that people actually want to hang out and play them. I think the bet that people are making, people like Cooper, who's a dear friend, is really that this provenance will be important, that you'll be able to say, I was one of the first 100 collectors of Daniel Allen, and like I was there from the jump, and he's compared it to like pin collecting and things. I definitely see that for a subset of people, but I don't think that the infrastructure is there yet to actually support people viewing that as collectibles that they can actually show off. Because it's not like a PF, like people innately understand PFPs. It's like, okay, I have a small amount of real estate on Twitter, I can show this off very quickly. Or I go and put it on a digital frame in my house and people can see it, or I send it that way. We don't have like something analogous to that in music yet. We don't have like the virtual like record store that people are gathering around and doing listening sessions, or spending real time in metaverses yet. But I think we get there. It's just super early.
Yeah, I agree. Like that's definitely the missing piece, is we need it to become normalized that people check your wallet the way they would check your social media to get a sense of who you are and to learn about you. And I think there's a really good shot of that happening. Like I joke about, will people put their wallet in their dating profile the way right now you'd link out to your Instagram? It's like link out to your wallet and people can see your music taste and maybe like the receipts from the coffee shop you go to every morning. And like that being a really interesting way to get to know a person is to see what they spend their money on, like probably a bigger indication of who the person is than whatever they're posting on Instagram, right? No, I suppose your wallet would be highly curated as well, so not really a reflection of reality.
Yeah, that like where we're at today would almost be like literally someone's looking at your bank account, like your bank statement of every transaction that you've made, instead of something that is curated that you would want to show to the world. I definitely think that we can get there, and it probably requires a bit of separation between the place that we're transacting and where we're displaying like our identity.
Definitely. Yeah. I don't think deep on that. I don't think MetaMask becomes like the ultimate, or like OpenSea, or like, right. Like these aren't the ultimate viewing experiences. Like we'll get much better like UX, UI and interfaces that will actually like allow you to curate in a way that feels more like the social media apps we're used to today. You mentioned Cooper, so I want to mention, I think it just dropped that he's launched his launch pad. I don't have a ton of details. You're on the board of that, I believe, or you're advising on that. Do you want to say a few words about what that is and then how you're involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So Cooper approached me earlier this month. He's obviously like been the music NFTs guy. I think that's literally just his Twitter bio, music NFTs. But he's putting together a 4-week program with the goal of getting 10 artists to mint their first music NFT. And so he'll walk them through how to set up a wallet and how to reach out to collectors, and really like the entire release strategy around what releasing a music NFT is. Because I think often people in this space just see it as, oh, I just throw up an NFT and hopefully someone buys it. But there's a lot of work that goes into the release strategy of trying to make that a viable, successful release. And so, yeah, I'm serving on the board with a few others to review all of the submissions, and then happy to announce as part of that Venice Music will actually be gifting our Genesis NFT passes to all 10 applicants that make it through.
Very cool.
COINSHIFT is a leading treasury management and infrastructure platform for DAOs and crypto businesses who need to manage their treasury operations. Every crypto org needs to manage their treasury, and COINSHIFT offers a simple, flexible, and efficient multi-chain treasury management platform built on top of the extremely secure Gnosis Safe. With COINSHIFT, your organization can go from primitive single-chain treasuries to expressive, flexible, multi-chain features such as global user management, global contracts, proposal management, and many other features that can be shared across an entire organization. COINSHIFT layers on powerful treasury management tools on top of the proven security of Gnosis Safe, allowing users to save time and reduce operational burdens and gas costs. COINSHIFT even has data tools like account reporting across the 7 chains on which it operates. Used by industry powerhouses such as Uniswap Grants, Balancer, Consensus, and Messari, COINSHIFT is speeding up the coordination and efficiency of the organizations that use it. In DeFi, you have to keep up with the frontier, and COINSHIFT makes that easy. So sign up at coinshift.xyz/bankless. There is a brand new staking feature in the Ledger Live app today. We all like staking the assets that we're bullish on, and now you can stake 7 different coins inside the Ledger Live app. Cosmos, Polkadot, Tron, Algorand, Tezos, Solana, and of course, Ethereum. With Ledger Live, you can take money from your bank account, buy your most bullish crypto asset, and stake that asset to its network, all inside the Ledger Live app. Through a partnership with Figment, Ledger also lets you choose which validator you want to stake your assets with. And Ledger is running its own validating nodes, offering a convenient way to participate in network validation, and it even comes with slashing insurance. Ledger Live is truly becoming the battle station for the bankless world, so go download Ledger ledger live. If you have a ledger already, you probably already have it, and get started securely staking your crypto assets.
So let's talk about Venice Music there. I've got a couple, again, maybe I'm saving the CC0 bit because I think that's going to be juicy and maybe some creator economy, monetizing superfans stuff that I want to talk about.
I love it.
Why don't you tell us what you have cooking at Venice Music and the way you guys are leveraging NFTs right now?
Yeah. So where we left the conversation in this very beginning is, so we had built our distribution product. We came out of stealth mode. This is around like late 2020. Ended up working with about 100 artists in a pure agency model. So it's not open to anyone. It's like referral based. We're reaching out to teams that we really trust and doing things that don't scale. And thankfully, like when we launched that, we did about 1.5 billion streams over the past year. And really built.
Damn.
Yeah, it was great. We had some phenomenal partners, artists like Eric the Architect and Amine and Twee, who have really like built lanes in the independent space. And we've also worked with institutions like Riot Games on their Arcane soundtrack, which soundtracks do really well. So that was definitely really, really great to work with them. And during this time, like I'm product lead working across our engineering and design teams to build all of these features and working with our partners to improve the distribution product. And then it's like February 2021. I had been packed up basically on the road, left LA during the pandemic, like packed up my hatchback Civic and was driving around and ended up in Colorado. And so it was cold and I'm basically just like degenning every night because I can't really go outside besides to ski. And I'm watching Top Shot blow up. Like I'm trying to get my hands on a pack. I can't. Then I watched the Bored Ape mint, which I sadly did not mint because I didn't really understand at the time that, okay, you didn't get there during mint, but you could actually buy it in secondary. That was like a whole learning process. But yeah, so I'm watching all this happen on the sporting and PFP side, but at the same time, this is when like Blau is doing big releases, RAC is dropping, Verite is dropping, Latasha is coming up with music NFTs or with music video NFTs. And then Spotty Wi-Fi is featured in a cover story for Pigeon and Planes. And like, I grew up in the Blog Boy era. Pigeons and Planes definitely like holds like a very near and dear spot in my heart. And so I've read that cover to cover, sent it to Troy and Susie and said, I think something is going on here. Like there's very clear that independent artists are able to really capitalize on chain in a way that they haven't been able to. And so like, I don't know what the strategy is for us because ultimately we don't want to be a middleman that's like antithetical to the entire space, but I think we should investigate this more. And so to their credit, we hired another product lead. We moved me into another amorphous title of strategy SVP and just had me go. And it was really me and Susie. It was kind of like a skunkworks operation where, I was jumping in every single NFT space. I was going to every single conference. And I distinctly remember at NFT NYC 2 years ago, or I guess like 2 times ago last year, sitting down with like David Greenstein and looking at the early mock-ups of Sound XYZ, like before it actually dropped. And he was talking about season 1 and what that would look like. And so we just got a lot of great advice and feedback and thoughts from artists and collectors and creators in the community. And another experience that really like sat with me during NFT NYC 2021, which was like very formative for us. We sat down with Trevor McPheedries from FWB, who is phenomenal and an OG in the space. And he kind of like walked us through, how he thinks about community, how he thinks about DAOs, like what it means to actually like build something. And we walked away from that meeting really thinking like, what would it look like if we really created like a community here that they felt invested in the outcome of what Venice was doing. And this wasn't like a transactional relationship. So that was one. And then the other was we sat down with Verite and her manager, Vanessa, and Verite, it was definitely a fangirl moment for me. Like I remember listening to her when I was at Amazon in like 2014. And so she was just like so thoughtful and giving with her time. But the one thing that really stuck out was her saying, even for me, and she's like very commercially successful in both Web 2 and Web 3, it often feels like she's on an island. Like this is someone who, you could say has like reached the mountaintop or, the pinnacle of what it means to actually be able to make a career off of your art. And she, along with her manager, still felt like very isolated and did not have that sense of community. So I think between those two meetings, Susie and I left NFT NYC that year. Like, okay, we know anything that we do has to be around our ability to bring people together. It's something that we've always done and not really gotten credit for since the beginning of Venice. And even before that, like Troy and Susie and their Atom Factory days were putting together dinners and making connections. And so it felt like a natural progression of how do we get people in the room talking to one another. And that led to the genesis of creating the Venice Music Collective. So for us, it was how do we both solve a business problem, to be completely honest. Like one is if you think about how artists and how like distributors really like the business models today, there's two. You are doing a rev share deal, which is to say like we're getting a percentage after on the royalties that come in. That's incredibly limiting. You're not going to do a rev share deal on a long tail artist unless you typically own masters, right? Because you need to lower your risk as much as possible from a just forecasting perspective. You're not going to expect to make any money back on that. And its operating cost is very, very challenging. On the flip side is the SaaS model, which is the DistroKids, the TuneCores, the CD Babies. It's you pay a flat fee, you can distribute everywhere, but good luck getting anyone on the phone. You're not talking to anyone. There's very much just like you see software and that's it. And neither of those really like fit our mission of wanting to empower independence for as many people as possible, whether, that's artists, managers, collectors, anyone in the independent music industry that is like trying to make this a career, trying to be involved. We want to be able to build a path for them. And so a membership really created an umbrella for us to do that. So from day one, when we launched the Venice Music Collective, which minted in June, you could use your NFT and actually sign in to our software, which we had already built over the past couple of years. We just added this Web3 component to sign in with your wallet instead of a username and password and be able to distribute on day one. It wasn't a promise of like, oh, we're going to have some future utility and this and that. It's like, no, we have a product for you right here. And on top of that, what we're doing is building, a lot of things in professional development. We're building a recording studio in LA for people to use. We've signed incredible partnerships with Neue House and Soho Friends, and also with Roland. And so we're looking for opportunities of, we know that being an independent artist is like trying to balance like a million different balls. How do we kind of get them all in one place so that it's a lot easier and they're all speaking to one another? And then how can the community grow and learn from one another? And so we've created a Discord. We've got like mixers and networking events. We're consistently doing panels. We're really focused on educational content because we know not everyone can get like white glove service, but how can we still like productize a lot of those services for people in our community?
So cool. And I knew what you were doing, but I guess I hadn't really heard the story, or it hadn't registered for me in the exact way of like really how much, I don't know, I guess due diligence, like you really went out and were like, what's the hole in the market? And it's interesting that you found this place that's it's not NFT collectibles per se, right? Like that's not like it's not music NFTs in the collectible sense that you hear Cooper talk about, for example. And it's not, though I imagine maybe you're thinking about this, it's not yet like, again, how do smart contracts or NFTs from the smart contract sense solve the systemic problems right now in music in terms of like just becoming the new rails upon which royalties get distributed, for example. But it's like this in-between space of community and access and empowering artists, as you said. So I think that's so interesting. And like a third category in the world of music NFTs that I really don't think has gotten as much attention, but is a super strong and valid use case for it all that I think is exciting.
Yeah, we definitely did not think that was where we were going to move at the start. It was very open-ended of just, we want to authentically add value. We're not here to insert ourselves in a process in which, artists can go and mint music NFTs on their own. Like, we're happy to be a creative partner to them and make sure that they have the right relationships and can go and do that and help them with strategy. But this wasn't just like, hey, let's insert us somewhere where we fit. And it was more of, we think we have an obligation to be a translation layer here. And also a thing, that I hadn't mentioned was in a lot of those conversations, because we were onboarding a lot of our roster to Web3 in that time. Like we were sitting down with artists, we were explaining like what a MetaMask is and how to set that up and how you get your first, Ethereum and purchase your first NFTs and what it looks like to be in a Discord. And we were making a lot of relationships we had artists like Sophia Alexa that we hooked up with like Alpha Girl Club, which is a PFP project, to go and talk about like mental health with them and do performances. And so we were constantly doing this like matchmaking on the side as well. But one thing that like consistently came up was on either side, it felt like they weren't talking to one another or they didn't understand one another. So meaning like if I'm a commercially successful Web2 artist, I don't understand Web3. And conversely, like if I am a commercially successful Web3 artist, I don't really understand Web2. And we like cleanly fit in between those two. So how can we get the two of them talking to one another? That's why we do so much like community investment and getting people like Troy is very intentional when we do monthly dinners usually at his place in LA, and he will bring people from all across entertainment, whether it is podcasters, musicians, managers. But he always makes sure that there's like people on other, like having opposing viewpoints to get them to speak to one another and not talk over one another. And I think we similarly have a guiding principle within Venice to do the same thing for our community.
Where do you think this evolves to? And I almost like hate asking that question because it's like, look, man, we're just trying to like, we're figuring it out with everybody else, and you've got this awesome thing going, and you're expanding the benefits to the community and all those wonderful things. But when you do look ahead a year or two, maybe 6 months, given how fast this space looks,
Sure.
like where do you see the intersection of NFTs, Web3 for Venice?
Yeah, I see it as an integral part of our strategy, and we'll continue to experiment. That's the one thing we don't want to do any like copy pastas right now in the Web3 space. It's easy enough to just go mint something on Sound and Catalog, and like I love those guys, and I think what they're doing is great for the space. But we want to work, and I know our artists want to work on things that are pushing the space forward and are experimenting. And so I see like a drop like Daniel Allen doing this generative release that has like rarity associated with it for an album that hasn't even dropped yet. Like those are the type of things that like I get excited about, and I think we'll do more of those with our community. And yeah, we're just going to continue to experiment and see like what resonates. Personally, like I am much more interested on the downstream impact of creating a tokenized relationship with fans than I am the collectible. And so what does it actually look like to create a tokenized community? And then once you have them, like effectively a CRM, like how do you continually go and speak to them, and how can you stratify them in a way of like identifying your super fans from your long tail and like moving them up the funnel and being able to reward them for things that they're already doing. A lot of conversation right now in the Web3 space, rightfully so, has been around how can we create more revenue generating opportunities for artists. And I think that's absolutely like a good narrative to be had for where a lot of independent artists are in their career. But I think if we're going to see mainstream adoption, the shift needs to happen of how are we adding more value for fans? Beyond this just being a collectible, what does this mean for the relationship between the fan and the artist? And what does this unlock that it wasn't capable before? And so that's really where I'm focused on, is how can we really double down there and build tighter relationships? Because yeah, you need 1,000 true fans to like quote Legion, and how that can like really work in that space to prop up your career in that regard. So we're definitely focused there.
So maybe let's just talk for 1 minute about that and what that does look like. And I'll kick it off by saying it's striking how these streaming services and a Spotify and things like that, right? Like flatten the price of music and don't successfully monetize the people who'd be willing to pay a lot more for an artist catalog. Like I'm a big Taylor Swift fan.
Yeah.
I would pay a lot more to be able to listen to all of her music, and that value isn't captured in the streaming model, which I think is part of this monetizing superfans in this new era. Talk about how you're approaching it.
Yeah, it's I have like a few thoughts. Ultimately, I think you want to unlock varying levels of monetization. And so what we have right now, to your point, is something that is completely flat. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet for $9.99 a month. It doesn't give any optionality in terms of if I want to pay more or less for different experiences. And so in the absence of that changing, one of the beautiful things about Web3 and NFTs is that we can create our own pricing. And, we don't need to think about scale for everything. Like, it can be okay to have just one buyer for your like one of one catalog drop, or, maybe 10 to 25 for an editions drop, and really be able to capture it all the way up. So that's how I see it going in terms of just like creating different levels of value for your fans, depending on, what the price point looks like. That I don't see like the streaming model changing in that sense. Like,
no,
they're I mean, we're moving to like user-centric royalty payments, which is great. I think a lot of people don't realize, you see like numbers thrown out of Spotify pays 0.0004 cents per play, but they actually don't. Like, they're not paying per play. They're paying a pro rata that is based on total streams, total revenue that's then divided. Oh, wow. And so what you see, and why that's actually concerning, because that's not a flat rate, I would actually feel a lot better if it was, is Spotify will continually negotiate better terms for themselves because they're not a profitable business still. So you should expect that they're going to do things, particularly in mature markets where they need to bring on free trial users to like prop up their subscriber counts. They're going to heavily discount or make music free for those subscribers. So if you're on like a 3-month trial or whatever, like an artist isn't seeing a dime of that. And that should be concerning when you just think about like, yeah, the total pie is growing in terms of total revenue coming in, but the value of an individual stream in that respect is going down.
How are they not profitable in terms of like, is this one of these like, we're Amazon and we're intentionally overspending to pay for growth and eventually, but we could be profitable? Or are they literally just like, this is not a profitable business and they are just raising money to sustain themselves and have been since their inception?
Yeah, it's the latter.
That's insane.
Yeah, it is. I mean, they were boxed in. I think a lot of people also, I feel like I'm the streaming guy that like sticks up for them sometimes because there's so much misinformation, and I worked at a streaming service for 5 years, but they were put in a very difficult position where they came from Sweden. They wanted to come to the United States. They were
You're talking about Spotify specifically?
Spotify specifically. They were basically told, these are the terms. And it's a variable, it's a percentage. It's not like other forms of content. Like Netflix goes and they spend, millions and millions of dollars on content, but it's a flat fee. Like they can actually make it up if they increase their subscriber counts. Here, the percentages stay the same when they get more subscribers. And so they're still operating on the same net revenue, which is negative. But yeah, they basically came to the States. They had to pay massive minimum guarantees at really high percentages. And they didn't have a choice in the matter because you don't have any leverage when the 3 biggest distributors in Universal, Sony, and Warner control 80+% of the market. Like you just don't. You do what they say. And that is a very different model than, again, like other types of media where it's highly, highly fragmented. And so no one content owner can ever have that much leverage. So in that sense, like it's going to be really tough. And I think particularly Spotify, of all of them, are going to have the hardest time in finding a path where it makes sense to run a viable business. It's why you've seen them get into podcasting and other forms of content, because those type of streams actually carve out of the pro rata so they can pay less of the total revenue that they're getting there. But Amazon can justify it with Prime and Echoes, and Apple can justify it, with everything that is in their ecosystem. They don't have a product. So it's gonna be tough. So I don't think we could look to that model to change where we're going.
Wow, that's so interesting. There's so many layers to this onion. Okay, let's go here. Let's go to CC0. I thought your post about this, you've written about this in a couple of different contexts. You have a Substack, we should say. We'll link to it below so folks can go find it.
Thank you.
You recently did a piece about CC0 and in the context of nouns. But you also wrote a post, or you had a tweet thread really talking about essentially like musicians releasing music as CC0, meaning it would be in the Creative Commons. They wouldn't have copyright. They wouldn't be enforcing any copyright ownership over that music. So anyone could come along and remix, use, leverage that music in any way they chose. Is that a fair way of describing it? And then please make this case to us.
Correct. And I know, like, I preface the tweet with all of my music industry friends and artists are going to hate me for this, but there's a very like clear use case that I see. And I want to be clear off the jump. Like, I'm not saying that all music should be CC0, like not in the slightest. What I'm proposing is that in the same way that like music NFTs and streaming represent different parts of a holistic release strategy, that you consider entering some of your music into the public domain. Because when you do that, in the same way that like the SoundCloud era and the mixtape era proliferated music, because effectively you were giving it away for free. And are you really going to exercise your right of a copyright like on SoundCloud? No, because you don't have any of the sync clearances to begin with. Like one of the interesting things with like Chance the Rapper, people often think that like he made the active decision at first to drop Acid Rap as a mixtape. He actually wanted to put it on streaming services, but he didn't have any of the clearances. So, you know, every time that you create a sample or anything like that, there are a bunch of different people that need to get paid. And so he put it up for free. What I was proposing is that when you are a small artist, the number one thing that you need to be focused on is growth more than anything else. And so what is beautiful of CC0 is that it really allows for ideas to proliferate. You're also like creating an incentivized audience that wants to lean in because they stand to profit. Now, does that mean leaving revenue potentially on the table? Does it mean that your content could be used in ways that you're not comfortable with? Absolutely. That is definitely the trade-off. Those live on the edge cases, but they can absolutely happen. And so what I was proposing is that like you kind of carve off a subset, whether it is like an EP or a single or what have you, and almost like create a contest around it where you're empowering your audience to go and proliferate your music and get it everywhere possible.
So that's really interesting. So I think people are obviously likely more familiar with CC0 in like the art context because we're seeing that all over the place. We're recording this a day after Moonbirds announced it was going to be CC0 moving forward. So it's a very sexy topic.
Very hot topic. Yeah.
Very hot topic. But people are used to it. You used nouns as the example in the article you wrote. People know it from nouns or from other Gremlin projects or from like Blitmaps as a CC0 project. And the bet that sort of being made in some cases is like, okay, if anybody can go build anything, like with Blitmaps, here's some rough lore, but then the world can go out and create stories with these characters and create some lore. And if it got really big and it was the next Star Wars, like how cool is that? And the NFT buyers in that case are betting on that. And then their NFT would go, up in value because people would want to own this piece of history, whatever. Like I understand what the bet is there. In this case with music, is it just that people would sample bigger sections of your song in their own remix music? Like people would go and use it in their film projects? Like spell out for us like what the proliferation actually looks like.
Yeah, and I think this mostly makes sense where as an independent artist, you own both sides of the recording. What I mean by that is like you have a master recording and publishing, and typically there are multiple constituents that need to be paid out for that. It's very challenging to make something into the public domain and get everyone on board with that. And so it's probably a use case of where you own 100% of your work. What I'm thinking through is what is the potential opportunity, particularly like you think of an example like synchronization rights, which for people who are unfamiliar is when you put a musical track on top of like something that's audio visual. Biggest example of a sync that you can think of right now is Kate Bush's song in Stranger Things. That sync has done wonders in terms of bringing attention back to Kate Bush, back to that song. Then you have people like Halsey going and performing it on stage. And so similarly, if you allow, like I actually did a bit of sync licensing and negotiating for like Amazon Studios back in the day, it's miserable because you go and there are like 10 writers on the track. There's, another like all the labels that could be on it that own different pieces, and they all want most favored nations. And it can be a real drag where music ends up not being heard simply because the negotiations are like, they just drag to a standstill. And so if you unlock that and say, no, you can actually just go and use this, because the bet that I'm making is that by having something in Stranger Things, it's going to bring a lot more attention to me as an artist, and I'll be able to use that to then go sell tickets, go sell merchandise, like be able to power all of these other parts of my business, which, by the way, actually make up a majority of where artists are making their revenue today. It's not on the recorded music side. It is on all these other ancillary things, or things that support, being a musician in the space. And so rather than fight what I just mentioned earlier with like a losing battle on the streaming side, it's finding other opportunities to build that awareness. Because ultimately, if you're playing the game of like us trying to get your music heard on like a TikTok or a Spotify, it's just like more and more content is being added there every day. And so you kind of need to give yourself another leg up and really have an incentivized audience to be able to pick up on that.
That is interesting. Like the idea of doing it in small strategic batches. Cause I think obviously, it's about more, the reason Taylor Swift wants to own her master recordings is about more than just the money she wants to make off of it. She's very wealthy, right? It's about like, I wrote these songs, I put my blood, sweat, and tears into this work. Like, I'm not ready. Like, she wants to own it because there's something that feels really powerful about that. I think it's the same reason why you don't see like one-of-one artists, or, like if you go to Super Rare right now, or right, like you're not going to see artists giving away like their art in CC0 the way you'll see it for these
Xcopy just did projects. Xcopy literally just did it.
That was the biggest, but that's a standout in part,
totally.
Right? Because you don't see it as often. Like I hosted a panel of artists, like Art Blocks doesn't do it, right? Like hosted a panel of artists at one of the conferences, Consensus, I guess it was. And it was 4 artists on the stage. It was like, Thank You X, All Seeing Seneca, Tyler Hobbs. And they were like, yeah, no. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to do it. So that being more of the comp. I think like it makes sense that artists aren't going to want to do this, and I probably don't need to make the case about it, that they're not going to do this like a wholesale, like just like release their work into the public domain. But in like small strategic doses, I think that's a really interesting concept. Do you think there's a world where it becomes like the early adopters have the advantages, and if the first few folks who do this maybe have like, there's a tension around it because they're doing it, but that over time, ultimately, it doesn't help people, because if you became oversaturated with CC0 in the public domain, like artists wouldn't really see the benefit from it because they'd be competing against a lot of other like CC0 public domain works?
Sure, then you'd have to move on to the next thing. I mean, it's in the same respect of like, if you were early to Spotify, there were a lot less people on there, or in terms of like that you were competing with. There was a lot less noise. And so, yeah, there was an early mover advantage at every piece of distribution. You go to iTunes, and by the way, most people fought it every single time. Like, it's not comfortable to try these new things, particularly when like the old model works for a lot of people and like they're seeing revenue from it. So I get totally that it's uncomfortable. I can also see that like it gets oversaturated, and then I think people will just move to iterate on something else.
You mentioned Chance, who I just love, and I'm curious how much he's an interesting case study for this new era, or not.
Yeah, Chance is definitely interesting. I mean, he captured all attention, basically took all the air out of the room as an independent artist, and was really held as, the North Star of what it could be to be an independent artist.
Maybe we should say, for anybody who doesn't have context, like Chance quite famously has never signed with a label, right?
Kinda. So this is where it gets complicated, because his last album he actually distributed through Warner. So
wow, because there's that, like, I just think of like, if one more label try to stop me, and
that was it. And there's this like interesting dynamic where people aren't signed, but they're using major label distribution, because even if it's not helping you on the digital side, it is still very helpful on the physical side. It is how you still get into the record stores and things of that nature. And so like, yeah, people would be surprised to know that like Chance the Rapper has used major label distribution. Macklemore, who is like another like big standout was in a major label system. But yeah, Chance is like someone obviously like I love, and was like a very like seminal figure in my life when like Coloring Book came out, and I got to know Pat really well, his manager, as like that was coming up. And I actually got to do that deal at Amazon. It was like a crown jewel as we were like going to launch. And so he holds like a special place in my heart, but I also worry that model of like what independent success looks like is not viable. Simply put, like if you look at like the top 100 songs on Billboard right now, you see very little independence. It's still very much like a closed game with the majors that are running, you know, can't use the word payola, but they have like very strong relationships with radio promotion and things of that nature to like get people up in front. They're still choosing the stars, even if we have a little bit more say. And so this was much more of the exception, not the rule. Now, I do think that we will see more independent artists like break into the top 100, and we will see global superstars that are independent. I think we see that on a lesser scale with an artist like Russ has done phenomenal. But it is a grind. It is very much like you're taking everything into your own hands. And the one thing that we kind of talk about at Venice is, you know, when you're in a major label system, it's like having an operating system where all of the pieces talk to each other. Like they're all kind of built to talk to one another. You have this machine behind you. And as a result of that, like that machine extracts a lot of value from you. Like that's why you get paid 15% and you have to recoup on outrageous advances, which that's a whole nother conversation, is like, why is the artist having to recoup all the expenses paid? And that's not like a joint venture thing where like you're paying it evenly. Like that's kind of part of the investment. You wouldn't do that in any other type of business. But you make that trade-off on the independent side where it's, okay, these are all disparate pieces that we need to get to work together, and they're different systems. And how do you get all those pieces talking? So like one of our roles we feel like is to create that operating system for the independent space. And so like if the majors are kind of like iPhone and it's closed, we're almost like Android and open, and we make sure that everything still complies to a standard, that it all still feels like value accrual and talking to one another. But yeah, the case of Chance is always interesting to me because it is held up in such like high regard, but like we haven't seen anything like that since. And I think really what will be interesting, and again, it's something that Cooper talks about a lot, is like I think we could see a breakout in Web3. I do think that because you do have super fans that are highly invested, we could see a superstar come from that direction, because it is such a deeper relationship than you traditionally have in the streaming world. I've called it before, like if streaming is your megaphone, then Web3 is kind of your campfire. And I think if you build a really strong campfire, you'll get people to get the word out.
That's cool. And Chance, maybe to state the obvious, is the exception because A, he's so exceptional, and B, because I'm sure some confluence of luck there, the way SoundCloud, whatever it was, like, is that why he's such an exception?
There is just such a confluence of things for sure. Like he obviously came at the perfect era in terms of the SoundCloud era and the mixtape era. And he was so closely tied to Kanye at the time and had a lot of, even if he wasn't a major label artist, he had a lot of major label connections and building that out. And so it's just challenging to see that be replicated.
He was close to Kanye from early days. Did he know him previously?
He was on, was it Life of Pablo? I'm going to get
but that was after his mixtape. Like that was, it was Life of, it was Ultra Light Beam or whatever.
Correct. Ultra Light Beam. And so, his mixtapes obviously like, it was still a different level than when his album came out and he was Grammy nominated and it was like the first artist to like do that. And that was like, he took it to that level like after all of those relationships, in my opinion. And it was very, I feel
like I'm not like cool, you know what I mean? I'm not like in the scene, and I knew Chance before Ultralight, you know what I mean? Before like Kanye. So he had really hit out into the mainstream in a certain way. It feels like even prior to that, which is just so impressive.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, his mixtapes, particularly Acid Rap, are held in lore as like some of the best around. But he definitely took it to another level with his album release, and obviously like that led to multiple worldwide tours and everything. But it was also fleeting, and I think that's something that people need to be very very mindful of. He lit fast, and he's still making music, but it obviously is not the same.
Awesome. Well, Austin, thank you so much. Congratulations for everything you're doing. I'm like, this has opened my eyes to a whole new world of like the independent artist scene. And I think what you guys are doing at Venice is so cool. So I really appreciate you coming on, walking us through this. We'll have to have you back. And thanks again.
Thank you so much, Carly. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Overpriced JPEGs. If you liked this conversation, if you liked this episode, please go ahead and hit subscribe. It helps me out, it helps the show out, and it means you will get alerts and updates when we post new content. Thanks again.